I love American Baptist College because it gives people an opportunity to discover who they are, who they might become. It helps them to understand the most important lesson they ever will learn in life, that God and their future are never separate and apart.
If he changes his life, that's good. If that's what it took to get him to go the right way. It's like the evil that serves like brain.
This place is serious grounds in terms of our academic pursuits, but it's also serious grounds in terms of the spiritual presence. I believe sincerely that the experience on the Holy Hill, as we would call it, is unparalleled anywhere. I don't feel as if there is any institution, no college, no seminary, no theological institute that can meet the level of training, the camaraderie that you will experience at American Baptist College.
The teachers, the staff, and coming in contact with the students, there was something there. I wouldn't say it's in the water, but there was something there on this hill, on the bank of the Cumberland River. You had a coming together of people.
One of the greatest things that shaped my life while I was a student at American Baptist College was the civil rights movement. Jim Lawson was here teaching the nonviolent philosophy of Dr. King and Gandhi. That whole movement shaped my idea of social consciousness. It shaped my idea of social justice. It shaped my idea of what a community of brother and sisterhood ought to look like, and how everybody should look at everybody else's humanity.
This was a place of social fermentation, of people raising questions about not only the racial issues in the society, but about what we were doing as a nation in foreign as well as domestic policy.
I was sitting there demanding a God-given right, and my soul became satisfied that I was right in what I was doing. At the same time, with something deep down within me, moving me, that I could no longer be satisfied or go along with an evil system. And in spite of all of this, I had to keep loving the people who denied me service.
It was a place of learning to love, to be loved, learning what it was like to take a position on certain issues, learning to put my faith into action, learning how to stand up and be counted in a time when it was necessary to be counted.
I learned the power of the human spirit, that a people who dare persevere and who dare discover the God in themselves and the dignity in themselves cannot be overwhelmed. They can't be defeated.
Our mission is to equip and train Christian leaders for service in the world. That's a great mission. It's a great mission because of the kind of world we live in and the kind of leadership it needs.
A major difference between violence in the 50s opposed to today, students have an easy access to guns, knives, and seem to hold grudges much longer.
So his argument then would be what? That it could happen in any school, private or public.
Students come here because American Baptist College has the reputation of producing great preachers, and they can learn how to preach and become a great leader.
All right, those of you that heard Brother Hannah's speech, what did he use to motivate you to listen? Reality, okay.
But behind that purpose also is this: American Baptist College gives them more vision about what is important about preaching, about the gospel. It gives them more vision about what's important as you become a servant leader in the world.
And when my time comes to go to my reward, I don't want your clone heart. I don't want you hooking me up to no machine.
You know what I'm saying? In terms of medical technology. Okay, now God does heal through medical technology. Right.
Okay. There was no way, if there was any thinker in you, that you could just come here and not be provoked to think profound thoughts.
The Iraqi kills the Iranian, and he says, Allahu Akbar, God is good. But for the other man, it is evil.
I don't think I would be where I am today if it hadn't been for American Baptist College. I owe my position today and the role that I play, not just in Atlanta and Georgia, but in our country, to my early beginning at American Baptist.
As I go around and I preach in the pulpits of our alumni, I see churches that have substantive programs. I see people who have been taught how to reflect upon the nature of ministry in their communities, and they are doing exciting things.
This kind of ministry where we engage the community and where the church is literally transforming people's lives, it makes a statement that the church is not an institution that simply sits on the corner, but it changes the corner where we sit. And that kind of understanding of ministry was birthed in me at American Baptist College.
Amen.
We need colleges like American Baptist College where young men and young women have an opportunity to go to college with a Christian undergirding, not only to prepare them for ministry, but to prepare them for life.
I've tried all kinds of things, worked different kinds of jobs, but nothing brings me joy like preaching the Word of God. Nothing.
Lord God, I pray that you would move in this place like we've never seen you move before.
I will always be thankful for American Baptist College and the experience I had here. It touched my life at the moment and shaped my life at the moment that it was most needed to be touched and most needed to be shaped.
I believe it's the greatest school on earth.
My prayer is that American Baptist College will have a long, fruitful future to serve the unfinished potential of future leaders of our churches and communities. Your gifts will answer our prayers.
Good afternoon, everyone. The video that you just saw was taped for American Baptist College more than 25 years ago. Thank you for being a part of the American Baptist College community conversation regarding the documentary about the late Congressman John Lewis, Good Trouble, seen through our partnership with the ever-impressive Belcourt Theater, Nashville's nonprofit film center. We hope all of you have viewed the documentary. Now we are going to have a conversation. Please welcome two board members from the Belcourt Theater to bring greetings, Ms. Dahlia Qualls and Mr. Terrence Hurd. Ms. Qualls serves as Director of Corporate Communications of Blue Cross Blue Shield of Tennessee. And Mr. Hurd is the founder and CEO of Hurd Modeling and Talent Agency and places models and actors in film and on stage throughout the world. His presence speaks boldly of the arts. Now, ladies and gentlemen, Ms. Qualls.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks to American Baptist College for partnering with the Belcourt Theater to view the poignant documentary of Congressman John Lewis, Good Trouble. The Belcourt is a cinematic facility to view and experience films that are historical, relevant, and enlightening. Good Trouble is just one of those. For a film that's so important about a hero we just lost, we wish we could all be gathered in person at the Belcourt with a sold-out crowd of friends, old and new. If we were in the theater, we would have plenty, just as Congressman Lewis would have wanted. However, we're grateful we are together virtually. Even though we're in the midst of COVID-19, we still find creative ways to entertain, uplift, educate, and liberate. Again, on behalf of Belcourt, our sincere thanks to American Baptist College for this partnership. Now, please welcome Mr. Terrence Hurd, a Belcourt board member.
Good evening, everyone. I bring greetings on behalf of Fisk University and the Belcourt Theater. I've had the privilege of serving on the Belcourt board for the past 6 years. I'm also a proud alumnus of Fisk. In 2017, I merged the two passions by creating the Fisk and Film Fundraiser at the Belcourt Theater. I previewed this film back in February of this year, thanks to a collaboration with Magnolia Pictures. The documentary is a wonderful depiction of the life of this gentle giant. It was scheduled for an April 30th advanced screening at what would have been the 4th annual Fisk and Film event, but as you know, COVID-19 changed those plans. So I was delighted to bridge the relationship between Magnolia Pictures and American Baptist College for tonight's event. John Lewis attended 2 historically Black colleges here in Nashville, Tennessee. He received his theological degree from American Baptist College and a degree in religion and philosophy from my alma mater, Fisk University. Community conversations around socially relevant films are such a core part of Belcourt's mission. Those conversations are more vital now than ever. We are so blessed by the life of John Lewis. The opportunities he provided, the roads he paved, and the blood he shed were so that we can continue to love, continue to learn, and continue to do. Because unfortunately, the fight is not over. Vote. Our thanks to Dr. Phyllis Qualls, Mrs. Lolita Tony, and the entire institutional advancement team for coordinating this project on behalf of American Baptist College. We appreciate all of you joining us virtually tonight. Thanks again to Magnolia Pictures and this panel of essential voices. The purchase of your ticket supports the Belcourt Theater while it's temporarily closed due to the pandemic. We look forward to seeing you back in those seats in the theater and becoming a member of the Belcourt for phenomenal films. And now, with remarks and to introduce the president of American Baptist College, please welcome the Vice President of Institutional Advancement, Dr. Phyllis Qualls.
My sincere thanks to Ms. Dahlia Qualls and Mr. Terrence Hurd, members of the board of the Belcourt Theater. This iconic theater, as was said earlier, supported us by arranging the viewing of Good Trouble on the date we desired, which was before the death of Congressman Lewis. We are appreciative of the Belcourt Theater and the board members for their support. Again, we say thank you. We have a distinguished list of panelists to discuss the documentary from various perspectives. Let me thank them again for their time and for sharing their perspectives during this conversation. First, we have Reverend Dr. Julius Scruggs. Reverend Scruggs is a graduate of American Baptist College and former president of the National Baptist Convention. He pastored churches in Nashville, and he recently retired as senior pastor of the First Missionary Baptist Church in Huntsville, where he served more than 30 years. Mrs. Frankie Henry. Mrs. Henry is a retired educator and was a student at Tennessee State University when she became active in the civil rights movement. She was scorned and abused at lunch counters during the sit-ins and still lives with those scars from those incidents. Reverend Kelly Miller Smith. Reverend Smith serves as senior pastor of First Baptist Church, Capitol Hill here in Nashville, which served as a think tank for the civil rights activists. His father, the late Reverend Kelly Miller Smith Sr., whose centennial observation took place yesterday, will reflect on the work of his father during this time and the things that he is doing now at First Baptist Capitol Hill. Mrs. Gloria Mckissick, a retired educator, was a student at Tennessee State University during the 60s movement. A native of Michigan, she wanted to fight for causes beyond herself. She marched, she participated in sit-in, and has literally shared her story on civil rights work throughout the country. Mrs. Novella Page. Mrs. Page is a proud resident of South Nashville and attended Pearl High School. She too was involved in the civil rights movement and the lunch counters of the 60s. Sitting at the lunch counters and marching, she fought for civil rights. Mrs. Phyllis Hildreth. Mrs. Hildreth is an attorney by training and education and uses those skills in a variety of positions. In addition to serving as Vice President for Institutional Strategy and Academic Affairs at ABC, she is a highly regarded consultant on conflict management and social justice issues. She serves on the Community Oversight Board for Metropolitan Nashville, and furthermore, she conceptualized the establishment of the SEAL initiative here at ABC, focusing on social justice, equity, advocacy, and leadership. This is a perspective that is infused in all the classwork of every student here on the Holy Hill. Now, if you will just give me a little breather here so I can do this name correctly, one of our newest employees. She's smiling at me now, and I hope she'll smile at me when I say it correctly. The Reverend Vahisha Hassan. I got a thumbs up here. She is a noted religious scholar and highly regarded speaker on issues of human and civil rights, infusing theology and social justice. She recently joined American Baptist College as the founding director of the SEAL initiative, where she will serve in that capacity and in other areas of the college. Rodriguez William White. Mr. White attended American Baptist College and is an official with the Nashville chapter of Black Lives Matter. It is no secret this organization has led the fight for justice for specifically African-American men and women who have been killed by police. They have staged protests throughout Nashville, from lying down on the interstate to standing at the Capitol. His story for Black Lives Matter is one that is poignant, and we look forward to hearing. Ladies and gentlemen, our panel. Now please welcome Dr. Forrest Harris Sr., now in his 21st year as president of American Baptist College, which is celebrating its 96th year. Ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Harris.
Thank you, Phyllis Qualls. It is my great pleasure to host this community conversation with this distinguished panel to reflect upon the tremendous contribution of U.S. Representative Congressman John Robert Lewis and his contribution and impact upon this nation and world, which is being celebrated and honored throughout the country. The first steps of John Lewis outside of his rural hometown of Troy, Alabama, would be here in Nashville on the campus of American Baptist College. Those steps would lead him to the 1960s student lunch counter sit-ins. Steps would take him to become a freedom rider in interstate travel, integrating bus travel, to the Bloody Sunday stance for justice on the Edmunds Pettus Bridge, and then later ascending to the halls of U.S. Congress, where he would earn the moniker of being the conscience of the Congress. The death of Congressman Lewis on Friday, July 17th, and on the same day, the passing of the Reverend C.T. Vivian, another giant and civil rights icon. Both graduates of our school, American Baptist College, places an insuperable burden
upon us to be good stewards of their rich and immortal legacies. Therefore, we are here, joining others around the country to celebrate and honor their legacies that they leave us. Legacies that are a part of the long journey that historian John Hope Franklin chronicles as from slavery to freedom. This evening, we are fortunate to have conversation with this panel of women and men about their understanding and their own sense of the contribution John Lewis made, and yet this unfolding revelation and struggle for justice and freedom, for which John Lewis gave his body as a witness for the truth to make America a better nation. Along with many of you who join us in this virtual space, the panel we have gathered watched the John Lewis documentary, Good Trouble. There is absolutely no way within the time frame allotted for this conversation we can account for the poignant touchstones of what the documentary reveals about the difference between the world John Lewis was born in and the one in which he died, and every action he took to bridge the gulf, the difference between the two. Each panelist and you in the audience will hear conversation and have various questions, I'm sure, about the rare mixture of humility, warrior-type courage, and the fearless faith that inspired John Lewis to offer his body as collateral, as a living sacrifice, many times for justice. So let's get started with this conversation. I would ask various questions to each panelist to speak to their own sense of grief and loss, and how the life of John Lewis impacts their life and still inspires them today. We will proceed with asking the panelists to share what stands out most poignantly as it relates to the documentary Good Trouble. John Lewis' death leaves us in some kind of a liminal space, cultural trauma and grief, trying to overcome the hard struggles of the past and the uncertainty of the future that affects us all in some ways. So the first question, let me ask. Let's begin by asking some of you to make brief comments about how are you dealing with the death of John Lewis, how his life inspired you. I will start with Ms. Frankie Henry, who participated in the Nashville Lunch Counter Sit-In movement, severely burned when a lighted cigarette was put down her back. Mrs. Henry, will you respond to that first question? How has John Lewis's life and how his death impacted and inspired your life?
Well, as a retired teacher at Metro, I've always introduced my students. I taught K through 4, and I taught in the inner city. We fed to about 4 or 5 different housing projects. My children didn't know anything about Black history or the sit-in movement, and I introduced them to all of the agony and all the trials and tribulations that we incurred during that time. And I'm still doing that. I have a book here now that John Lewis presented to me, and it said, "To Frankie, keep the faith." John Lewis 1:13-12. And he reminded me that Diane Nash had told him about her pulling me off of the Jefferson Street bus. I had on-the-job training. I did not participate in the movement. I think Diane wanted me to go to Kane Sloan's with her because she was very fair-skinned. And when she had gone in all of these restaurants by herself, they would always serve her. So she needed somebody to go with her. So she asked me when I got off the Jefferson Street bus, "Are you a college student?" And I said, "Yes." She said, "Will you walk with me for a moment?" And we passed Woolworth, and I saw Black students sitting at the counters. We passed McClevin's, Cress's, and I said, "I'm from Nashville. I grew up here." I said, "Oh, they're going to get in trouble. We can't do that." She said, "No, this is the first day of the sit-ins we've been meeting at Reverend Dr. Kelly Miller Smith's church, and you have to be nonviolent." I said, "Nonviolent? What does that mean?" So she talked to me. She said, "You're going to have on-the-job training." So she and I went to King's Loan, and in about 15 minutes, they served her. They didn't even look at me. But then when the lady came back with her coffee, she saw that Diane was talking to me and explaining to me. So that's why we had to leave. And then she took me on Fifth Avenue and set me in McClevin's beside Paul. And that's when the lady put the cigarette out on my arm. And I started to hit her, but I turned around and Reverend Dr. Kelly Miller Smith was looking at me saying, "No." So I didn't do anything. And then she lit her matches and pulled my poncho back and threw her lighted matches down my back. In about 15 or 20 minutes, we were hauled off to jail.
Thank you.
So he inspired me because we were in jail together.
Thank you. Dr. Scruggs, you were a schoolmate of John Lewis at ABC. Briefly tell us about your memory, the one that you cherish most about John Lewis.
I met John in 1960 when I was a freshman at American Baptist College, and he was a senior. I come to understand John after we became friends, that he was very brave, courageous, and bold, yet he was humble and kind and gentle. And I admired those qualities in him. And he later recruited me and my friend, classmate really, William Barbie, to become a part of the movement. My first experience in the movement was one night when we were demonstrating at the Tennessean. That's the downtown theater, as you remember. And during that particular demonstration, I got hit with something. To this day, I don't know what. It could have been a brick. That's what some folks thought it was, but I don't really think it was a brick. But anyway, I was hit right on my right cheek and it damaged my eye. So I had to go to the hospital, and the doctor ministered to me that night and patched up my eye. And I had to come back to Harvest, Alabama, to my boyhood church where I was pastoring, and preach that weekend with a patch over my eye. But later on, John invited me to become a member, to ride with the Freedom Riders, to go on the bus trip, as you well know. And when I called my mother, she said to me, "No, I can't take any more." So I didn't go on the Freedom Rides. And I guess God's will was not for me to go, because he had some other things he wanted me to do, because my classmate Barbie, who went, was beat up in Montgomery when the bus was there in Montgomery. And of course, as I've said to you many times, Dr. Harris, the beating was so severe that upon returning to Nashville, William Barbie died. Barbie, my classmate, gave his life for the movement. But I remember also, when I think about John, how much he gave of himself daily to the movement. He was a preacher, called preacher, as most of us were at American Baptist College. But John was not just a preacher who preached on Sunday mornings in a church. John preached every day of the week, Monday through Sunday. He preached in the areas of Nashville where we demonstrated at the lunch counters. at the Greyhound bus station on the Freedom Rides. He preached when he was part of SNCC. He preached when he was in Selma, training persons to vote. And he gave his life as a daily preacher of the gospel of Jesus Christ, practicing the love ethic that he had become acquainted with in his classes at American Baptist College and in the tutoring of Jim Lawson and C.T. Vivian in their regular weekly trainings for the students who were participating in the movement.
Thank you so much. Let me ask Mr. Rodriguez White. He's a student at American Baptist College, has been and part of the Black Lives Matter movement. What inspiration do you get from the life of John Lewis?
Thank you, Dr. Harris. As far as what inspiration I get from Dr. Lewis, I would say the inspiration is to just continue to work at all stages, right? Whether that be looking at his career, looking at the more grassroots side of it, which is the sit-ins, the freedom rides, right? Or rather it be the electoral work, whether that be the work that he's done in Congress. Just myself as an organizer, making sure that I am involved in the process and whatever stage that I need to be involved in. That's probably the biggest thing that I take from Lewis's work. Even if it's not in agreement all the time. I'm from a different generation, right? So a lot of things that John Lewis did later on in his career, I might not necessarily agree with, but knowing where he came from to where he's at now, knowing that it's pretty much similar to the path I'm going on right now, I'm a descendant of that legacy. I'm a descendant of that work, and I'm required as a descendant to continue to lead for the next generation.
Yes, thank you. A different question. In the late David Haberstam, who wrote a book, The Children, in that book, Reverend C.T. Vivian is quoted as saying that God had a master plan here in the late 1950s and 60s, bringing so many uncommon people of such rare strength and vision together in one place at the same time. In your estimation, and I'm asking this question to Kelly Miller Smith Jr., in your estimation, how crucial was it for John Lewis to have had a sense of being called to a life of meaning and purpose, along with that constellation of many people who gathered here in Nashville for various reasons, and many of them on the campus here at American Baptist College and at other schools in the area? And Kelly and his family are celebrating what would have been the 100th birthday anniversary of Kelly Miller Smith Jr., who was senior, right, who was so important in bringing students together. Kelly.
Well, I think among the things that my father tried to make sure they understood when he was teaching there, he was a Homo Lex professor there at American Baptist Theological Seminary, then now American Baptist College. But to understand that preaching and pastoring is not the only calling, and helping them to understand that it goes way beyond just preaching. And unfortunately, many pastors and many other persons, church members as well, try to convey people into believing that the only thing they can do is if they are called, that they're called to preach. And John Lewis, who had a strong admiration for my dad, would oftentimes talk about being in his class and being under his tutelage in whatever ways those were. But it was important for him, John Lewis, as well as others, to understand that God calls you to many different things. And in that call, that's an affirmation of your understanding how God speaks. When I was teaching there at American Baptist College a few years after my dad, that it was a similar message that we tried to get to the students and hopefully help to guide them in the ways that they need to go. So that's part of the challenge, is understanding what is it that God really calls you to do. Dr. Scruggs just mentioned a while ago, in his own context, why it's important to respond to what it is God would have you to do.
Yeah. Gloria Mckissick, you were involved in the movement. And as you watched the Good Trouble documentary, what most stood out for you in the Good Trouble documentary, particularly as it relates to your experience as a part of the movement? What stood out as you looked at the documentary as it relates to your own sense of John Lewis's life?
John was a remarkable individual. And when I met him in 1961, the 60s original sit-ins had taken place, the freedom rides had taken place, and many students were very reluctant about becoming involved, continuing to be involved in the sit-ins because people were being suspended from school. The freedom riders had been suspended from school. I came from the North. I was one of those outsiders, and I had been told by my parents not to participate. They feared for my life, and my dad said, I'm sending you south to get an education. And I got the best education I could by being involved in the sit-ins, getting in that what John called good trouble. I understood that very well. And he was my role model. And that's all I kept thinking about, is how he was such a role model. And you would look at him, and this little man, quiet, was so impressive in how he conducted himself, his ability to forgive people, his strong faith and commitment really moved me quite a bit. And I went on my first sit-ins with John Lewis, and he told us how to behave ourselves, how to conduct ourselves. And all I had to do was look at John and feel the faith and the commitment that he had, and it transposed itself into what I would become my whole life, trying to be an activist. And like he said, stand on the ground, stand for what you believe in, to be committed to a cause. And when you see something happen, don't just stand by silently and say nothing. You have a moral commitment to get involved and make a difference. And that's what stands out so much to me about John. He walked the walk and he talked the talk.
Yes.
Living.
Thank you. Ms. Novell Page, would you respond to the same question as you watched the documentary, and one who was involved in the movement while John Lewis, C.T. Vivian, and many others were here? What stood out to you as you watched the documentary? Ms. Page, you are muted. Unmute.
Okay,
Thank you. Yes.
Thank you, Dr. Henry. One of the main things that stands out to me, because I was there before he was there. I was there in the 60s in the sit-ins at Woolworths, and I've been back since then, just 2 years ago, for the first time in 60 years. But it reminded me, just knowing and watching his lifestyle and watching what he has done for not only the minorities, but anyone that is underprivileged, what he has done for he is one of a kind. Let me put it that way. He's one of a kind. We'll never have another John Lewis. But sitting on that stool many years ago, being recruited by the civil rights workers, C.T. Vivian, as well as Reverend Kelly Miller Smith, we met at his church. And this is when they taught us how to deal with the nonviolent movement period, and how we need to conduct ourselves when we go down to the lunch counters. No matter what they did to us, we had to, sort of smile and take it. Some of the guys weren't able to go through that, but I met Martin Luther King as well as Reverend Kelly Miller Smith, and they taught us how to. And in doing so, and this was before John Lewis, this was in the 60s, February 1960. And when we went down, of course, we ran against a lot of things in terms of mustard being poured on you, ketchup being poured on you, cigarette ashes being sprinkled in your hair, you name it, they did it. All kind of language, needless to say, and spitting on you. It's been to go through that, not knowing what I was getting into when I did. I'm glad I did because at that time, even though I was young and a college student, but I realized something's got to change in Nashville. Growing up in Nashville and the Jim Crow laws that were going on, I knew something's got to happen because it was unreal because of the color of my skin. They made a difference, and that just I said, something's got to give. And I think if I had to do it again, when I was younger, I would do it again. But I'd be much younger than now. I admire what's going on now because now we have all races, and especially the white race, that are on the front line. And that's, of course, due to our social changes of things. Things have changed. Blacks and whites are marrying each other, so they're having brown children. Children are getting more browner in the world than they are. So there's a difference. And so I think they're the ones who's going to make the change. It's no longer we shall overcome, but it's now Black Lives Matter. And that makes a difference. So John Lewis is really the icon for all cities, all civil rights movement. He is almost like Martin Luther King. He was the sort of not the second in command because you don't have a what you call one person leader among our race, but he is one that will stand out among all, and that's my experience with him. Never had a personal encounter with him.
Yes. Before. Yeah. Thank you, Ms. Page. Thank you. In 1989, the memoir that John Lewis wrote about the movement, Walking with the Wind, John Lewis stated, the scars and strains of racism are still deeply embedded in American society. When we think about that statement and the trauma, the cultural trauma, and the uncertainty of our current time with the pandemic and racism in terms of systemic problems that have been lifted up as a result of the pandemic and as a result of the recent murders of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery, and others, and the significance of John Lewis's contribution in the development of what I would call the quest for just public policies as he championed in the Congress. And I think in the documentary, they listed a number of bills he sponsored or co-sponsored legislation. Let me ask and change the direction of the conversation a bit by asking Phyllis Hildreth that there are many symbolic ceremonies that began on Saturday honoring the life of John Lewis. And there were many other efforts to honor him in symbolic ways. There'll be naming of buildings. And there's a school in Virginia that has been changed from Robert E. Lee High School to John Lewis High School already. After we get through with the symbolic honoring of his life and move symbolism to substance, what would you call, in your estimation, good trouble for us to get in the 2020 year cycle here now of the election? And how does that come into the work as you see it here at American Baptist College? Yes, unmute Phyllis, yes.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. President. The call to get into good trouble in the 21st century. I was so excited to hear from our own Mr. White here, because I think that the answer to the question is, what do we need? What is the work? And what do we need to know in order to be able to do the work? And how will we do the work together? So when we ask, what do we need to know to be able to continue the work that Congressman Lewis said was still undone and still remains, much of that, when you look at his great body of work, we're looking at understanding civic power. Where does civic power sit? How does it operate? What can we learn about that? That's one of the first lessons, sir. And then the second is, in this learning environment, how do we understand that the foremost instructors and professors in this work are the young? I am impressed to continue to listen to the 23-year-old John Lewis, right? In terms of what he was doing and what he was saying at the March on Washington, and how we pick up the threads of that syllabus, but sit with our own 20-somethings and understand how has the world changed? What do we need to look at? So I think very specifically, we look at a curriculum that needs to be infused with attention towards understanding procedural justice, collaborative governance, participatory budgeting. These are all approaches to understanding how we work and move in our world that are backed by scholarship, but need to be implemented by praxis, right? Mm-hmm. As we move towards movements for reconciliation, reconstruction, and reparations, we have to understand, what does that need to look like? And when we ask, what does it look like? Not only do we need to ask our young, but we need to expand the notion of who we are as a community. So how do we ask our indigenous members of the family about what it means to be water protectors at Standing Rock, or mountain protectors at Mauna Kea in Hawaii, right? We need to ask them what's going on. We also need to understand the parallel histories. Many of us do not know or pay attention to the fact that at the time, young John Lewis and Ms. McKissick and Ms. Frankie and others were doing their work here, there was a generation of Jamaicans who were going to rebuild post-war United Kingdom Britain. They're called the Windrush generation. And that generation is being deported today and sent home and being stripped of their civic rights and also their health benefits, right? That very much mirrors what we're doing. What does it mean for us to understand the struggles of the rest of our community so that we can come together and figure out what are our priorities? What is the work? How do we do the work? And how do we do the work together? Thank you.
Thank you so much. That response and the other responses that we've gotten in your comments about John Lewis and how you are inspired by him and his contribution leads me to ask this question to our newest colleague at ABC, Vahisha Hassan. How do you understand our being a good steward of the legacy of John Lewis in light of the kind of challenges that we face as it relates to structural injustice? How do we become civically responsible and accountable as agents of change? And how does that change impact the way we understand our church relationship and the things that go on in our church in terms of public ministry?
Thank you, Dr. Harris. That is a question that speaks directly into my passion areas. And being the new kid on the block, I hope it is great that you are all going to meet me this way, because I have lots of feelings about this, right? And so I would say a couple of things. So civically, when in the documentary, Representative Ayanna Pressley named John Lewis's life as the blueprint to do three things: to organize, to mobilize, and to legislate. This is what she named. And I personally see that already, that legacy in like the Southern Movement Assembly, which has a Southern blueprint for what movement can look like. And it names both how to seek the liberation that we want, that we're fighting for, like resisting, dismantling systems of oppression, but also how to live into right now and today the liberation that we are yet seeking. Mm-hmm. And I think that's a message, that's going to be a message and a place. Well, let me say one more thing about that, because there's a message and a place for the church and our Black and brown bodies in that. And so I see that in BLM, right? In organizing and mobilizing. I see that in the movement for Black lives in the Breath Act. And so we can't lose, if we're talking about this legacy, Reverend Representative Ayanna Pressley, and then who else was it? Representative Rashida Tlaib, they're in the documentary. And right now they are the champions of legislation known as the Breathe Act that is coming through the electoral justice arm of Movement for Black Lives. So there's a legacy even in the documentary and in this space and time for our movements. And I think that life and legacy becomes both an indictment of, but also an opportunity for our faith communities, for our churches, for our movements. Because when you spoke about some of those legislations, one of them was to repeal, don't ask, don't tell. That means that repealing needs to also happen in our faith communities. That also needs to happen in our movement spaces, right? So how do we do and come with this intersectional lens of humanity and dignity of worth that John Lewis fought for at all of the ages? Then violence against women, disability justice, environmental justice, gun legislation, and also knowing our history and putting forth the African-American Museum out of the Smithsonian. So that legacy is happening, but there is a call to action there. His whole life was a call to action. And he even said to us that there is a call on all of our lives. There is a front line for all of us in those three things: to organize and to mobilize and to legislate.
Wonderful. There is a call to action, and there's a call in all of our lives. Let me ask, to go back to both Julia Scruggs and Kelly Miller Smith, both of you can kind of interact with this question. If American Baptist College in its tradition of prophetic preaching, with the kind of theological imagination to connect the scriptures, the Hebrew prophets, with justice at the core of what the meaning of the kingdom of God has meant, what and how does that impact your perspectives to connect civic engagement, public policy formation with prophetic preaching tradition that we've been doing so well in terms of American Baptist College in producing people who speak to that, not only in the pulpit, but speak to that in their chosen vocation, whether it is in education, whether it is in public health, whether it is in other areas of entrepreneurial leadership. How do you see the preaching tradition of the church, Black church, and here at the college intersecting with what Vahisha and Dr. Hildreth just mentioned to us in their response? Any one of you can go first.
I'll yield to Kelly.
I think part of the challenge is helping people understand that there is a weaving of the prophetic message, social justice issues, and the gospel that cannot be extracted from each other. I think part of the challenge that we have is that we end up too often in other contexts of this personal salvation sort of thing that does not speak to the issues of that go beyond one's own self. I think there ought to be issues that are addressing individuals as well. But I think also we forget or we lose sight of the fact that where our real message is to the masses, whether they're persons in our congregations or even beyond that, that we have to speak to help them to know and to understand that the God that we serve is a God of justice, a God who's concerned about social justice issues, a God who's concerned about healthcare, God is concerned about poverty, God is concerned about speaking truth to power, speaking to all of those sort of things. And what American Baptist College has done historically has been to help to shape the minds of persons to understand that your preaching is more than to know about the saving grace of Jesus Christ for an individual, but that there's saving grace for the community that has to come through the prophetic portion of the future as well.
Yeah.
I'll compliment Kelly's statement by saying that I agree with you fully, and simply add in terms of illustration that there has been a kind of dichotomy from time to time with Christians about whether Jesus Christ came to give us personal salvation versus social salvation. And that has been, as you well know, particularly a big fight, as it were, in the white church tradition. Many of the white pastors talked much about the Bible teaches personal salvation, but does not teach social salvation. But when you and I look at the Bible, as well as your father, who was our mentor, we see that God called Moses to tell Pharaoh, let my people go. He called Amos to speak to the northern tribe of Israel to say, let justice roll down like waters and righteousness like an ever-flowing stream. He called Micah, and in his trilogy, he raised the question, what does the Lord require of you? To justly, love mercy, and walk humbly with God. And I spoke a minute ago about the love ethic of Jesus that John embraced day by day. It seems to me that one cannot really be prophetic until he understands or she understands those dimensions of the Bible and of the gospel of Jesus Christ.
Yeah, I think John Lewis epitomized the combination of the intersection of justice for the body, justice for the collective community, liberation for the poor in connection with what it meant to be in relationship with God, particularly as a commitment to the life of Jesus Christ, and that was inseparable in the way in which he proceeded in the Congress as a U.S. Congressman, and all of the policies and legislation that he sponsored had the drippings of that liberating thread of the gospel in it, and people could see it because of the way he expressed it and because of the love ethic that he applied to it. Let me ask this question, and any of you can chime in to this question. John Lewis never became bitter. He never allowed the deep toxicity and racism to make him bitter and to become one who would hate or do those kinds of injurious things, even verbally or physically, toward those elements in society that did so much that caused him to suffer. And I was reading this morning something out of the Commercial Appeal, our hometown paper there in Memphis, where the writer of the article, Tanya Weathersby, said that what's important is how we do not allow the system to define and shape us, but we bring change and commitment to change the system rather than the system defining and changing us. Anybody, how do you respond to the hate, the vitriol that's going on in our current society that polarizes people around race and culture and keeps us from the creative responses that we can make as people committed to the prophetic gospel of love and justice and bring change to the community because we refuse to let the community define and change us? Anybody can respond to that. As they say in the church, not all at one time. I'm going to ask Ms. Novell to lead us in that. You're on mute. Could you just give us your response to that? You're on mute. Yes.
Thanks a lot for calling on me first.
Well, okay.
However, I look at it in a different way, a different manner. And the first thing comes to my mind, when, especially with John Lewis and others who've been humiliated and dehumanized. And I would say it's something within me that opens the rain, that you don't burst out and do things you shouldn't do. It's that something within you that is hard to explain, because oftentimes you wonder how much more can you take? But it's just that something that would not allow you. Why get angry? Because that's hurting you. Why hate? That eats you up. Hatred. So you look at the opposite. What would it take for you to destroy yourself over what someone else has done to you? Or but you look at it and say, thank God we know Jesus, and that we know that He's going to make a way for us. We know that He's in control, and we know that one day we will be free.
Yeah. Thank you. And in terms of conflict management, Black people have had to manage conflict. They had to manage terror. They had to manage assault against their bodies and their minds. The survival motif in our community is strong. Over and again, sometimes the liberating motif that calls us to action, as John Lewis. Phyllis Hildreth is steeped in conflict management techniques as it relates to how you manage that so that it cannot determine the outcomes for you, but you can work yourself through it at various levels. Phyllis, you want to respond to that and others as it relates to this hate and bitterness, because the whole response and reaction that's in our streets today, with guns involved and vigilantes involved, with white supremacists and guns. These are serious times that our people are vulnerable again to public terrorism. And if we don't deal with that whole sense of what John Lewis would call, yet good trouble, necessary trouble, but to love yet and to bring justice to the situation. How do we bring justice and love to such deep, thick conflict in our society?
So one of the things I learned and we teach in conflict management is the first answer to a question like that is it depends. And in all seriousness, one of the things that we probably need to do is to have the ability to move from the general to the specific. So where are we sitting when we have that sense of concern? If we are sitting in seats with John Lewis in places of governance and legislation, then it becomes very important to channel that necessary anger, right? To move from an emotional space to our prefrontal cortex strategic space and say, exactly what do we do with this? Where do we want to go? What are the processes that are available to us? What is the leverage that we have? How many pieces do we have on the chessboard to move forward, right? And to do that. It's another thing to be in the street, on the sidewalk, when we are being attacked by state police on Capitol Hill. There, I think one of the best texts in conflict management is a portion of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s letter from a Birmingham jail when he gives 4 very clear, specific points. It is a classic negotiation text. And he speaks thusly. He says, first, we need to analyze the situation. Is this something within our scope? Is this something we can attack? Is this something that we can bring our energies to bear on? And if that's true, can we negotiate? Negotiation necessitates a platform of equals. So there has to be equal power, equal respect, equal leverage. And if for any reason there's a power imbalance that will not allow that to obtain, then he says you may need to do direct action, but before you do that, we stop for a place of prayer and purification and preparation. And then we move to direct action. He said direct nonviolent action. So again, I say it depends. Are we moving in places of process and procedure? Or are we moving where we're going to have to work with different tools to pull down different structures? No matter which answer it is, we do know that we have the training, the knowledge, and the ability within this shared learning community, and particularly within the institution of American Baptist College, both in its history and in its presence and its future.
Yeah. Let me shift to another issue as it relates to John Lewis and his education here at ABC and his own public education as it relates to how the movement itself became an educational field for him. I think Jim Lawson, the nonviolent ethic, the whole civil disobedience, and the actual praxis in live, real time, as he lived in that period, became an education for him. The concern for this question that I will ask David Tucker perhaps to respond to, and others, is our domains of education continues to recycle images theologically and biblically that are conservative and out of step with the kind of life that John Lewis lived. Our churches are out of step, maybe in many ways, that does not bring social justice to the core. White evangelicalism is a good example of how they promulgate an understanding of the gospel that's different from the life and commitment of John Lewis to justice. How much unlearning will we have to do in order to move into an educational understanding that moves us to a new future? That's to David Tucker, but others may chime in, Vahisha, Julius, and all of you. What our churches have been co-opted and our thinking has been co-opted by so much of the colonial white supremacist understandings of America, capitalism. All those things are mixtures into how we're in this current period. David, you want to start us off with that?
Thank you, Dr. Harris. That was a long, large question. The little piece that I'll try to bite off of is a thought that we've been working on for a couple years. Theological imagination, which is liberative in and of itself, the freedom to be able to encounter a text and even if necessary, to read against the text, to have conflict with the text, other than following the rote, pre-prescribed interpretations that I think are problematic, particularly with the Black church, because I think that with the Black church, it keeps the church from doing what it should do, and that it should be that liberative body, that body that speaks hope and breathes life anew. But many times it is really perpetuating the social ills that are causing the problems in the larger society. So in these sub kind of ways, we come into church and we hear the same things that life push up on us. Sexism, otherism, colorism, all these things that I believe that are part and parcel of the gospel, that you can't separate justice from love. That to even have love, there's a presumption for me that justice is the place where love shows up. To have it show up anywhere else, it can't be love. It's sick, it's something else. So if we expect love, and I say all the time to my folk at my little church, you can't do big justice if you're not living a life of little justice. You can't get your hands around poverty. You can't get your hands around mass incarceration. You can't get your hands around that when you think your wife is less than you are. You can't get your hands around that when you disown someone who has a different sexual expression than you do. You can't get your hands around it. So for me, the freedom and liberation that comes with theological imagination that's based on me having the image of God in me. So by having the image of God in me, I'm able at times, various times, sometimes, to be able to speak on behalf of God. So that to me is one major issue that I know I've been giving myself to, and that I think I stumbled across early on in my time at ABC, that requires courage, even to be able to stand and declare a theology that is driven by the creative nature of the ever-present Spirit of God. Now, that's some big stuff right there.
That is some big stuff. That is some big stuff.
Dr. Harris, I would like to say amen to Tucker and simply go a step further to say that there's another nuance to that issue, and that is we ought to be very careful where we go to get our theological education.
Yes.
That's one of the reasons many of us think the way we do is because we were under a Reverend Dr. Kelly Miller Smith Jr. We were around a Reverend C.T. Vivian. We heard carefully Dr. Martin Luther King, whether we knew him personally or not. We heard him, we understood his theology, and our lives and our social consciousness and our preaching were shaped by these persons. And many pastors today are getting their education from purely white Bible colleges who have no real sense of what the Black experience is all about. And if you don't know what the Black experience is all about, you can't really teach Black folk how to preach, how to live, and how to pastor their churches.
Thank you so much. You know, I knew this was going to happen to us, is that our time for this conversation would get to a point where when we're just getting the fire and the launching pad where the plane can take off, we'd be at the point where it would suggest we need to have more conversations, and we will here at American Baptist College have more conversations to be good stewards of the legacies of John Lewis and C.T. Vivian. And who would not be proud? Who would not be proud of the legacies of John Lewis and C.T. Vivian, and proud that their beginning occurred here at American Baptist College. I was going to do my virtual participation in this conversation at home, but I needed to feel the power of being on the Holy Hill as we had this conversation, because it is the place that God has used in the past, and we believe God will be using in the future as we continue to make a commitment to justice and freedom and love for the changing of America. One thing John Lewis said in the documentary is that he's afraid that he's going to wake up one morning and our democracy will be gone. That he's afraid that if we don't get in good trouble, we don't become committed at a deeper level, then we might not have a democracy that's safe to pass on to the next generation. That's why American Baptist College is so important. John Lewis's life, C.T. Vivian's life, Martin Luther King Jr.'s life, the life of Frankie Henry, the life of Gloria Mckissick, Novell Page, all of you who participated in the movement. There is a purpose larger than all of us. And that purpose is the purpose of God that cannot be extinguished and eliminated, even by death. Who shall separate us from the love of God, God's purpose? Life nor death, height nor depth, nothing can separate us from that love. And John Lewis's life, now in immortality, God's purpose goes on and will perpetuate itself in the humanity of another generation. And for that, we give God thanks for the life of John Lewis, C.T. Vivian, Martin Luther King Jr., William Barbee, and many unsung heroes that speak from their graves, but in the mortality of eternity. Don't quit. Keep going on. There's other good trouble ahead of us. Thank you, this panel. Give yourselves a big hand for the participation this evening. And Phyllis Quarles Brooks will now close us with other comments.
Thank you, President Harris, and thank you again to all of our panelists. We certainly appreciate Belcourt Theater for this partnership, and Dahlia Qualls and Terrence Hurd, members of their board, for being with us this evening. We thank you, our panelists, Reverend Dr. Julia Scruggs, Mrs. Frankie Henry, Reverend Kelly Miller Smith, Mrs. Gloria Mckissick, Mrs. Novella Page, Mrs. Phyllis Hildreth, Reverend Fahisha Hassan, and Mr. Rodriguez William White. We also appreciate our Executive Vice President, Mr. Richard Jackson, for being here with us, and Professor Reverend David Tucker for being with us and sharing their Sunday afternoon. We were focused on the good trouble of John Lewis, and we will remember him and continue his legacy as we move forward in our lives. There are several services for the late Congressman Lewis. Services have already been held in Troy, Alabama, his hometown. His body was peacefully crossed the Edmund Pettus Bridge today and is now lying in state in the capital of Alabama. His remains will also lie in state in Washington, D.C., and his final service will be in Atlanta, Georgia. If you want to see more students like John Lewis, C.T. Vivian, Bernard Lafayette, William Barbee, Cora Austin, Susan McClear, Tanisha Robinson, we ask you to please support our students here at American Baptist College financially. You may go to our website to make a contribution, www.abcnash.edu. This Holy Hill is a miracle place, and we honor it for all those who touch its sacred ground. And if you are interested in attending American Baptist College, our classes will be distant learning this fall semester, and classes start on August 24th. We invite you to be a part of our ABC Strong worldwide by posting a celebratory message on your social media platforms and channels on Tuesday, July 28th from 12 noon to 2 p.m. Central Time. Just say simply, I love American Baptist College. Remember, at American Baptist College, we believe in good trouble. The struggle continues. Thank you for your time. Thank you for your service. Thank you for what you have done and what you will continue to do for American Baptist College. Good afternoon and farewell. Bye-bye.
All right, thank you. Have a good Zoom meeting, Fahisha. Celebrate your, great.
On Friday, July the 17th, 2020, American Baptist College lost two great alumni, the Reverend C.T. Vivian and Congressman John Robert Lewis. American Baptist College family extends its condolences. Their contribution to America and to the world will last long into the centuries and new generations, for their stories represents the American story of freedom and justice. Both of them fought for America to be better. They fought for an America that would be fair. They fought for America for nonviolence and justice. There are no words in the canon of the American vocabulary that can exhaust the meaning of their lives and contributions. Both of them came to Nashville young, energetic, and enterprising. They were students at American Baptist College, discovering themselves as preachers, as ministers. As students, they joined the student sit-in movement. And as a result of being taught the Gandhian method of nonviolence, they came together with a team of young people, set in at Nashville lunch counters. And as a result of taking the brutal hostility of a segregated city, nonviolently, yet loving the people, but having a deep commitment, a fierce commitment to justice and freedom, they were able to integrate the lunch counters here in Nashville. They changed Nashville and they changed the world. They continued on the freedom rides across the South into the cradle of the South in Alabama, in Selma in Dallas County, where C.T. Vivian stood on the court steps and Sheriff Clark resisting them and keeping them from registering to vote, hit C.T. Vivian squarely in the face, knocking him to the ground. But C.T. Vivian stood right back up, claiming his humanity and the right as a citizen to vote. John Lewis arrested more than 40 times. But his resilient spirit, over 50 years, he was always encouraging us to get in necessary trouble, get in good trouble. He was always saying to us, never quit, never give up. Both of these giants for justice, both of these humanitarians, both of these gentle spirits, both of these persons who were examples of the American dream, yet the American dream is what they had to fight for all of their lives. Both of them now have a legacy that they have left us, a legacy of giving fully to the dream of justice and freedom in America. Now we must do more. We must be good stewards of the legacy they leave us. They've shown us what the work is. They've shown us how to do the work. And now we must extend that work to every student who comes to American Baptist College, to every community struggling for justice and transformation, to every policy that does not represent justice and does not represent the best of what life can be for the
Very important. You decide what to do.